The second question of tonight is, what are Sikh organisations currently doing in regards to mental health issues? Gajan Singh, you've already given us a breakdown of what the Sikh helpline do. Is there anything you'd like to add to that? Because as far as I'm aware, when you're talking about specifically dealing with mental health issues, there's not many organisations that are specifically dealing with that issue. If anyone does know of others, please raise your hand. I'm going to go through a list of other groups and individuals that do this within the Sikh community. But before we do that, do you have anything more to add about what Sikh Helpline are currently doing in regards to mental health issues and connecting with the Sikh community?
So the focus on mental health has been something that's been probably for the last 6 months to the last year. The first stage is training the volunteers. Teaching those that are going to go out and engage with the community as to how to integrate with this, safeguarding, putting in a few protocols, which initially I thought, oh come on, let's just go out and do it, but actually you realize that people within your team, not everyone has the same skill set, so it's preparing everyone in that capacity. Then it's a case of, well, open the phone lines and wait for the calls to come in, and that's kind of where we are. So someone will phone and we'll allocate someone to them, and sometimes it becomes a bit more informal. I'll spend maybe 2 or 3 visits with a family or an individual, and I'll think, okay, I now know where we are roughly. Let's find the appropriate person to delegate to you. Let's get you into some formal therapy. If it's a case of you've got an addiction to something and you want to go away somewhere and spend time in a place where you can just get away from the addiction, facilitating that. So most of what we're doing at the minute is facilitating between the person who is suffering it to making someone who's surviving it, and it's being that gateway between the two, because I'm not a mental health expert, by no stretch of the imagination, but it's a case of I'm lucky enough to know a few people in those industries, and
that you can direct them towards. Jaspal Kaul, so I know you've done quite a lot of work with different Sikh organisations in dealing with mental health issues. Do you want to expand on what organisations are doing work in this area?
Yeah, I think a lot of organisations it feels like, and maybe this is my ignorance in it, but it feels like a little bit more recently have been speaking about things, have been using the terms mental health, mental ill health. And I've done a little bit of work where I think it feels like perhaps a risk was taken in not a lot of people know much about art psychotherapy and using art as a mode of expression in a less threatening way. And I think one of the organisations that I worked with, Khalsa Aid, they were able to sort of tap into that and think, okay, we'll go with it, not knowing anything about it, but thinking, how can this be helpful? So that was interesting to see it's picking up. But I think as a general sort of feel, it feels like it's in its infancy. And it's really interesting, Benji, how you noticed about the mentioning of the low mood, because it actually feels, and maybe this is not sort of correct of me to say so, but it feels like that part of things, so maybe like the top layer of saying, okay, this is low mood and anxiety, is able to be somewhat absorbed. Anything a bit deeper and a bit more sort of a bit more difficult and challenging and not known, and we do work with the unknown. That's as professionals within this, that you can't ever truly know. As much as you have training and experience, you're relying on that interaction, that human interaction. So I think when you're bearing all of that in mind, it's not any wonder that actually our community and Sikh charities find it difficult to get into that messy, the real, the depth, that kind of grey area. Like, how do you go about it? How do you start that conversation? And how do you then move forward when you're in it? Because it's frightening. It can be frightening for not only the person experiencing it, but in the trust that is being placed in you as a professional to try and walk you through that. And I think as Sikh charities, they're picking up on it and they're thinking about it, but we have to be careful that it doesn't become a trend at that level. Yeah. And we actually, it's this thing, we're going to do a mental health thing. I think we need to get a bit deeper into it.
Yeah, essentially there might be quite a few groups doing surface level work, but doing the actual deeper things there aren't many examples of. But I'm just quickly going to go through an example of some of the individuals and organizations that are doing work in this area. Before I do, just from the audience, how many of you could name more than, let's say, 2 organizations within the Sikh community that are working in the area of mental health? Hands up if you can name more than 2. Just one person out of every, well, 2. So not many people know, but I'm going to go through a quick list now. Firstly, Harjinder Singh of Akal Publishers, one of the most respected Sikh educators in the country, is quite open in detailing his own issues growing up in a family where there's mental health issues. He's said that for sufferers of mental health and their carers, the pervasiveness of helplessness and lack of understanding determine their experiences. And he says that our community holds honor higher than health and well-being in his own experiences. There is a Banji called Ripaljeet Kaur who's based in Leeds. She does quite a lot of work in the area of dementia. She runs workshops and awareness lessons in the Punjabi Sikh community at schools and gurdwaras. Sikh Youth UK do a lot of work in areas of addiction and dealing with people that have suffered sexual abuse, and they provide support through a Sikh ethos and also through Sangat, so it's bringing them into their own kind of community. Support is both for the individual and for the family, providing them with coping mechanisms through things like Simran and Seva, Simran being meditation, if you will, and Seva being a way to kind of get involved in something else that might take their focus elsewhere. Nanak Naam are an educational organisation run by Satpal Singh. He describes them as a charity dedicated to educating people on a holistic approach to mental wellness as well as mantra mindfulness. There is Hope and Compassion run by Manpreet Kaur, an organisation that have recently done a Gurdwara tour around the Midlands. They do a lot of work for special needs children. Gurleen Manku works for AS Mentoring, who is specifically looking to do an event aimed at the Sikh community about helping people with autism lead a normal life. She specifically works for an organisation which helped to get people suffering with autism into employment. The Sikh Education Council, they've been running events on mental health since the autumn of 2016. We were hoping they would provide one of their pamphlets, which actually has an article on the neurochemistry of depression written by Dr. Palwinder Kaur Manda. I don't think we have any here, but they might turn up, you never know. But they've been doing work on facilitating discussion in mental health for over a year now. Jasvinder Rai, based in Derby, is a former alcoholic, now clean for 9 years, that does a lot of amazing work tackling addiction, which is a big issue within the community. He's actually presented before the UN, and he does regular workshops at Gurdwaras around the Midlands. Rani Bilku of Jina International in Slough provides counselling for members of the Black and Asian minority ethnic community, and specifically holds counselling for female victims of crime, given that they do a lot of work for immigrants that might have been exploited on their journeys towards coming to this country. SWAT, the group most known for their Langar Seva, they do a scheme where they provide company for people in care homes, usually elderly people. This has been defined as a mental health professional as psychosocial intervention. And in general, many of the Langar Seva organizations come across people, usually the homeless, with mental health issues, and they just try and deal with them with compassion. Is this enough? Should there be another branch that they can use for these guys to get more help? That's something that we can discuss now. But I'd just like to open it up to the audience, because I've named about 7 different individuals and organizations that do work in this area, and only 2 people were aware of any work in this area. So I'd just like to hear from you guys, if you could pass the mic to
Yeah, there's us as
Do you want to introduce? Yeah, exactly.
Us as well. We're British Sikh nurses. We're a fairly new organisation since April. I'm a children's nurse, the only Sikh children's nurse, British Sikh children's nurse for the last 20 years. I'm also a senior lecturer at ARU in Cambridge, and I do adolescent care. We recently actually got together with Voicing CSA, and we're dealing with children from sexual abuse and those who have suffered sexual abuse, and going with them with their mental health as well, and supporting them with their mental health. We've also got together with Mandy Singera, who's a UN, who's huge, absolutely huge. So I'm one of her mentees as well. So we're actually going global with her as well. I've actually gone global as well in terms of Sikh communities and gone out to villages in India, and we've taught hand washing, the basic needs of hand washing, you know, just coming out of the toilet just to wash your hands. It's massive. We're also working with Binti, an organisation that works with wives that are, you know, really been downtrodden by husbands as well. So, you know what, we have a scope. We really do. I sincerely think we have a scope. We have a scope for especially our young generation. And when I've come across the young generation in terms of young adolescents and young children and adolescents, and along with Sikh societies within universities, such as ARU, Cambridge University, I'm with them, quite a few. There's quite a huge initiative within the youngsters to really open up and get some awareness, so it isn't just as much as it should be that our parents don't know. And actually really thinking about it, we are second generation, you know, I'm second generation. Our children are far more open to come to us than what would have been our, you know, our parents and etc. Wouldn't have gone to my mum and dad, certainly not, but certainly children will come to us in terms of our age. So it is beginning to open up. It's a very small hole at the moment, but it is slowly widening. And I think with the contribution of so many organisations such as SWAT and everyone, I think this will widen even further. And the perspective is huge to get this really going in terms of mental health.
So Vijay, sorry, could you just also say where people can follow your work if they want to get in touch?
You can certainly follow my work. Just wear the t-shirt. I'll put the t-shirt, so follow the t-shirt, and I'll hand out cards if you need it as well. So certainly follow. We have 16,500 followers so far on Twitter and 32,000 followers on Facebook. And majority of our Facebook followers are from Punjab and India, and it's huge. It has gone huge since April just this year. And you know, there's a lot of youngsters out there that just need tapping in and just need a hand. That's all it is.
Do you focus on, building like emotional resilience?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. I mean, down to mental health, what we think about are the three things. The real crux of mental health is thinking, behaviour, any altered thinking, any altered behaviour, and communication. And that's what you're looking at with that child. The child that's just been not talking to you, the child that's not talking to you, the child that forgets to eat, doesn't eat, and they lose control. And we're working now with Cambridgeshire in terms of their adolescent unit, and we're working closely with them as well, looking at you know, eating disorders and etc. as well, because that's huge within the Asian female population, and it's not seen. It's not seen. The last control they have is what they put in their mouth. They lose every other control in their terms of their life, but the only control they have is what they put down their mouth, and they stop at that point. And that's what it's sad to see.
Yeah, we're just going to let Gajan Singh interact, but I just want to re-emphasize the point, guys. Only 2 people raised their hands when I asked if anyone knows more than 2 organizations that or individuals that work within this area, within the Sikh community. So I think we need to look around and ask ourselves, are we actually doing enough to engage with those that are working in these areas to give them the support that they need to take it further? We'll hear from Gajan Singh, and then I'm actually going to pass the microphone back to Sharanjit Singh, who's going to talk about a project that he's running, which is in this the field of mental health. But sorry.
There's a very important point you've raised, which is just about all the organisations that you've mentioned, they all started with like a small focus, and as they've expanded, you know, as that hole got a little bit bigger, it's a bit more light and the path gets a bit clearer, and it expands and the path gets a bit clearer, and that is kind of a big take-home message for everyone, because a lot of the time, you know, we're talking about some very deep, very ingrained and disturbing situations here, but sometimes you think, you know what, I can't help someone with that. I could help someone with this. I don't mind going into an elderly care home and spending time with someone. I can do that. We are all, not everyone here can do everything, but everyone can do something. Yeah, and that's a really important point, because with the organisation that our brother has mentioned, is all of them started off small, and all of them started with a small team, and we're so lucky. And if you use social media strategically in the right way, even if you don't really know what you're doing, it just comes to you, right? These things expand, and more and more people will come to you for help, and more people will come to help. And that is how we are a Sangat. That is how we are a community. That's how we are a Qawm. That we realize that, we are capable of doing something. Another sort of side issue, I'm an Anglia Ruskin alumni myself, going back about 7 or 8 years. And back then we'd started off the Sikh society when we were told, there's not much scope for it. Now it's flourishing, and there's a lot of Sikh societies within the university spheres, which is such a great battleground for open discussions, because a generation now there's more open talks. As a sister at the back mentioned, the conversations between first and second generation Punjabis and second and third generation Punjabis, they're different. I'd like to think that we are now focusing more on emotional intelligence, but building these skills, it's going to take time, but in the community we have it, and today's been a great platform to highlight how many skills we have amongst each other, and now it becomes a type that we're running out of excuses.
Yeah. So we're going to pass the mic to Sharanjit Singh over there, who's running his own new project, and if you could tell us a bit more about what you're doing.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. My name's Sharanjit Singh. I'm a 22-year-old student here in the UK. First, I'd like to say thank you to Sikh PA and the panel members, and also the audience, for having and facilitating such a fantastic conversation already that's hugely needed within our community. So we've had loads of questions, and a lot of you might be thinking, how can we help? What can we do, say, straight after this? How can we help in the longer term? I run a social media campaign at the moment called Tarakki. Tarakki is designed to shape a society in which Punjabi men can speak openly about mental health. I'm looking to collect and share the mental health experiences of Punjabi Sikh men, taking them out of the private, out of the family, and into a public where people can see, people can read, and people can know the people who have been infected by mental health, these mental health issues. What I look for is Punjabi Sikh men who want to share any of their difficulties with mental health. For example, I went through quite bad social anxiety when I was doing my undergrad, and I noticed that these discussions weren't being had in the public, and we've mentioned before that there is a distinct cultural difficulty with discussing mental health issues outside of, say, the family or outside of a private space. So what I want to do is change this culture, and be that through, say, social media in the short term. We're on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and at the moment what we're doing is showing Punjabi men that they can speak about mental health. This isn't something that's reserved for a certain type of person, but it's something that we're all able to engage with, and should be allowed to do so without judgment. What I'm looking for particularly, as you may have gathered, are Punjabi Sikh men willing to talk about their mental health, their experiences with mental health, and how they feel the community has both empowered but also restricted their abilities to come to terms with what's happened to them. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. Tarakki is spelled T-A-R-A-K-I. And I've also got an email address for anyone who wants to get in contact. It's submission@tarakki.uk. But I'm also available afterwards if anyone wants to have a conversation. And being a full-time student myself, what I am aiming to do is bring this conversation to light within the Punjabi male Sikh community. It's not that I don't feel there's an issue in the wider community, but I'm one person. I'm taking on a small chunk of it, and I'm going to try and make a difference in any way I can. Because I believe that, as we've said, the younger people are the key to this, but we can't forget the older generation, who still have so much to offer in this discussion. And I'm hoping that I can kind of bring people together to take down a culture that really seeks to restrict us and damage ourselves, our community and our families.
So once again, guys, if you want to know more about organizations like what was just described to you, any of the ones I've mentioned, please do get in contact through any means, whether it's through social media, have a word with one of us afterwards. We're happy to kind of share details and promote the work of the Sikh individuals and organizations that are working within the mental health sphere. We're going to take just one more audience participation on this, and then we'll move to the next question. So Banji, if you want to.
Yes, I'd just like to give just food for thought. I'm a health practitioner and I do acupuncture, and I've treated children from the age of 5 years old to the elderly up to 80 years old. And time again, the victims have said there's a lot of prejudice. So I think we need to, as a Sikhi, not only focus on this mental health and depression, whether it's mental or physical, but we need to also educate the people that are the so-called norm society within the Sikh community, because the victims, whether it's depression or the whole umbrella that comes under mental health, the victims would openly come out much more if the prejudice was broken down. Now you've got the older generation, which is still, they're set in their ways. But if we could also aim at looking at how are we going to break down the prejudice for the victims. So
It's definitely an area of focus, yeah.
The community, whether it be in the Gurdwara's education, we need to educate and focus more on the society that is the normal, because that would help the victims. Because my patients say time and again, from children to adults, if half the problem is educating the people that are causing them the stress.
So we do have a question that will look at active steps that the Sikh community can take to deal with mental health issues.
Just to add on to that point, what really stuck out for me as you were speaking was when you said so-called normal. And to highlight so-called normal, actually Gurbani does the same thing. So most of us and a lot of us that do kind of put ourselves in that category of being that so-called normal, Gurbani actually says that Jojo dise so rogi. So Guru's actually saying that wherever I'm looking, I actually see everyone to be diseased. And so Gurbani talks on a level of speaking of when somebody is so taken over by this little bubble, this little world that they live in of ego, and from that ego stems when their certain energies and emotions get out of control, whether it be anger or whatever else. But not very often in our communities, somebody that is finding it difficult to get a grip of anger, for example, looks at that as being an issue, or actually it being even closely related to that's something that could lead to a mental breakdown. But Gurbani does recognize that. And how you highlighted that to say the so-called normal people, and from my very recent experiences of something I've personally gone through, and a lot of the times that the people that are put in the box of being normal, in the way they react to someone that is going through a situation and anxiety, actually they don't know how to deal with it, and it's because they're fighting with so many demons within their own self. So they're actually not got a clear picture of life anyway. And so my whole perspective of sitting here is, out of collecting everything from here, from today, is looking for a forward active step that we can take from here. And just again, when Veerji here went through a list to say, actually, there is so much in place. Why don't we know that? And why don't we recognize that? There's a reason for that. Because if we look at Veerji here, what they're doing is more specific and is more targeted and is working more with youth, adolescents. But all of these other organizations, they're doing great work, but that's not necessarily the main focus of work. So I'm not going to pick up the phone and go to the likes of some of these organizations, because I know they also deal with this case, that case, and so again, when we think of that as a Sikh helpline, so for us when we're trying to look for answers, okay, so where do you kind of pass that work on too. So what seems like is lacking is there's not actually one Sikh organization that is dealing with this head on when it's just mental health. So it's got to get to a point where somebody does reach out to Sikh Helpline, does reach out to Sikh Youth Birmingham, but then they say, actually, we've got a Sikh organization that deals with this. And that's why these aren't recognized yet, because they are doing so many different types of work.
That's a good point.